Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Wait till Lightheart here from Bioptimizers with another edition of the Awesome Health Podcast and live YouTube station. We're really excited about this because we have
Dr. Gary Shlifer.
There we go, Dr. Gary Shlifer, who is here. I'm going to read his credentials for us. He's a board-certified internal medicine physician. We're going to talk about what that means. Specializing in preventative care, nutrition and metabolism, and anti-aging medicine. Dr. Shlifer is the founder of Evolve Healthcare in Los Angeles, a multi-speciality integrative medicine clinic focused on disease prevention and lifestyle optimization. Mm-hmm. He's the co-founder of Sapien, an organization focused on promoting health education and advancing health information technology. After immigrating to America from Russia at the age of 3, Dr. Shlifer grew up in the San Fernando Valley, where he returned after his medical training to build his practice. Through his companies and community outreach, the doctor works to promote his message of healthy living, eating, and lifestyle practices while developing into a leader in his community. Gary, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I love it. That sounds pretty good, huh?
That sounds awesome.
Pretty good.
And you know, I always find it funny because like we get these little readouts here and you know, you go, I always read through them and I try to be as radio show announcer as I possibly can. But it's so interesting to compress one's lifetime of work into 3 paragraphs where you're trying to hit these bullet points and it never tells the real story. I'd like to, before we get into everything that you're doing today, is to kind of get into, we can drop this, to get into how you went from an immigrant from Russia to a doctor traveling around transforming people's lives from a preventative and optimization kind of program.
I mean, I have to credit my parents. I mean, look, my parents grew up in as difficult as this world and this country is right now to live in, and I do think it's becoming increasingly challenging, that world that they came from is horrifying, you know? And I grew up hearing the stories of communism, the stories of the USSR, and you know, my mom was one of few physicians in Russia, and she was Jewish. There was few Jewish physicians and there was few females, and my grandfather was very instrumental in getting her into medical school there, and she's a natural healer, and I think I really, I got that from her, like naturally. You know, they moved 2 little kids to Russia, from Russia to America. She went back to school to become a podiatrist for a number of years.
What part of Russia? It's a big country.
Moscow.
Right from Moscow.
Moscow, yeah. My dad was born in Uzbekistan. My mom was born in Moscow. After he served in the army, he moved to Moscow. Right. They met. You know, back then, and probably even now, you know, it was very important for Jewish affluent families to marry together, to keep that. So they got connected, you know, and they had an opportunity to immigrate. It was part of, we're actually political refugees. It was part of a time where we were getting Jews out of Russia still.
Did you go through the Israel route?
We didn't. We went through the Italy route. So
I've got a number of Russian friends. I've got actually a long list of Russian friends.
Yes.
For whatever reason, I get connected with Russians. And I know there's a couple of routes that people were using to get out of the political situation. And I'm a big fan of reading the Gulag Archipelago by Alexander Solzhenitsyn. And I think for anyone who thinks that this experiment in socialism going to communism and this whole prospect of being woke, of where this goes, this already existed. This happened at the Bolshevik Revolution, and Solzhenitsyn, who was part of what we would call the woke group, ends up in prison after fighting in the war and lives this horrific life and comes to the realization he's actually put himself into this situation. What's it like, before we get into from what your parents told you and stuff, what is it like working under a totalitarian regime, and then what's it like to kind of escape, to have an opportunity where you can speak your mind, you can say what's not conforming for the goal and all that sort of stuff? Yeah.
For them,
Yeah. I mean, these stories are probably embedded into your upbringing that led to you also becoming a doctor as well, right?
That's the whole story. I mean, my parents My parents just always questioned everything. For them, it was a dream to come to America. It was a dream to be able to like raise their kids to do what they wanted to do. What's scary now is I grew up with hearing about it, right? I grew up, and I think to get to your first question, like why am I doing what I'm doing? Because they told me you're smart, Gary, you can figure it out. You don't need to be told what to do. Go get your education, learn what's out there, take it seriously, but never let someone tell you what to do. Because what they're saying makes sense, do it. But question it. So that's where I come from. I guess my wife always says like I have like a punk rock attitude about it. Like I do what makes sense to me, and I consider myself smart enough to integrate what I've learned and apply it now. But to answer your other question, it's really scary for my parents to watch this unfold. And I have a lot of immigrant patients from Armenia and from Iran and from Georgia and from all these other countries, and the young people that don't know the history, whose parents weren't able to sort of put it in their brain where they came from, whether they were too young or the parents are busy, whatever, those people are following this woke attitude. And this is a tough topic to talk about, but like it's scary for my parents to watch the society they came to love and found success in and raised their kids in, going back to where they left. They're like, why did we leave? We're here for the freedom. We're here to be able to stand next to someone and disagree about a political view. And it's like, cool. And like, let's go have a coffee after, you know?
And let's have a discussion and let's throw things. It's okay if we don't agree or we have a different perspective. And that's what makes a free speech being a free society. And now we have what I wrote a book about this a number of years ago called, it's called The Rise of the Digital Republic. And I was a kind of a traveling digital nomad, running my online business.
When was this?
Until a few years ago.
Okay.
When I came down here, I traveled the world for 10 years, lived all around the world, and dealt with people from all different types of cultures. We'd sit down, there'd be any given time, there'd be 20 people from different cultures, and I would hear the stories. I would find out what it was like and why they moved and why they took this. And what I recognized is that in today's world, we went from tribal life, which was filled with warfare, disease, and destruction. Then we moved into kind of city states, which was filled with now cities going against each other, like Troy and Athens, or Sparta and Athens, or all kind of these historical things that kind of in this vagueness we don't get. And then it moved into the nation states, which Europe and all these things are just warred for years, and then the great empires of Rome and the Ottoman Empire, or the Tartars, or you can go back in history, or the Russian Empire, all these things. You can go the Portuguese, the Spanish, you can go down to South America, the Aztecs, the Incas, the Maya, all these different warring nations and tribal aspects. But then most of those were determined by language, culture, and natural barriers, oceans, rivers, mountains, land masses. But what's emerged in this incredible digital technology world, as I said, this is the rise of the digital republic. So I'd be talking to some of my younger, more digitally savvy friends who are grown up with the iPhones and grown up on pads and grew up in the world of www. They don't know what it's like not to have the internet and all its benefits.
Generation right after me.
Yes.
Right after me.
Yeah. We're the last of the Mohicans, right?
Yeah.
And what's fascinating is, I know we're kind of off topic, but we might as well get on it anyways. I saw that my younger, more digital savvy friends knew all the rules of Amazon, or how the YouTube algorithm worked, or how to get more likes on Instagram or Facebooks or these type of things. But they didn't know what was going on politically. They didn't know what was happening geopolitically. They didn't know about the historical and the really dark aspects of humanity in the world. And not as a disparaging effect, but without knowing that you now potentially become victim of what I call these digital republics, these super states like Google and Facebook and Amazon and YouTube, which now transcend all boundaries. And at the flip of the switch, the CEO now becomes the new digital tyrant that can control the narrative and control these type of conversations. And so when I look to someone like you, for example, who's grown up and developed a level of professionalism. Becoming a doctor is very difficult. It's a very long, arduous process.
Yes, it is.
It's very specific. You've got to understand how to interpret data and information in studies and what's valid and what's not valid. And you get into this world trying to help people, obviously, because it's a very noble profession, one of the most noble professions of the world.
We strive for it to be.
Yet, once again, who gives you the education? What's the research information?
Who's paying for that education?
And is it scientific education, or is it marketing flooded through a scientific edge? What's your opinion on that? Because you've kind of broken away from the traditional side.
Yeah, I thought, so I started residency in medical school pretty naive. And even though my parents were doctors, they said, do it and we'll help you through. And they've been so instrumental in helping me kind of break away from those traditional Western medicine ideas. But going into it, I was like trying to learn. I was just trying to learn. I thought I was naive. I was like, oh, they're just teaching me science. I bought it all. I learned all the recommendations. Oh, you have this diagnosis, you do A, B, C, D, and immediately once I started practicing, which is first year of residency, I started realizing it's all a manipulation to promote either one kind of food system, mostly to push drugs, and procedures. And I wanted to become a specialist. I was really interested in GI. I was really interested in hepatology. And after like 6 months, I was like, this isn't what I expected. You're making me memorize recommendations. When I bring to my attending, like, hey, this is the person in front of me, I think we should do this other treatment course, because mentally and spiritually, they're not going to respond to this series of treatments, and they're going to do poorly. And it was always like, shut up. Even in residency, I got a little bit of a, like when I graduated residency, I got an award for most likely to complain. Oh. And I looked up and I looked at everyone and was like, complain? You guys just shut your mouth and do what you're told. I'm just asking, why the heck are we doing what you're why am I doing this? I'm not complaining, I'm asking why. And when it comes to dealing with sick people, so as an internal medicine doctor, I'm trained to manage sick people, sick adults specifically, yes. Right? And more specifically, to be a hospitalist, because the system needs doctors in the hospital, getting people admitted, getting them discharged within the 3-day limit or whatever the codes justify how many days, only using the resources that are needed and not overdoing it. And that's like what they're training you. They don't tell you that. They tell you, oh, for this is the recommendation. For this heart disease, we do A, B, C, D, then they get this procedure, and then they get discharged. But slowly what you realize is they're just pandering to drug companies, insurance companies, the bottom line bill that whoever has to incur it. And the idea is train you to get paid a pretty decent salary, but we're going to bill twice or 3 times as much and make our money on you. And as I was like training, I was like, hold on a second. Mm-hmm. I'm not here to be the bottom of the barrel. I'm not here to be told what to do and then not get paid and then catch heat on my notes or catch heat on how, if I kept a patient for an extra day in the hospital, or hey, I did an advanced care planning discussion where I talked about what happens at the end of life with an 80-year-old, and they're like, why are you doing that? We want to do a cardiac cath. I'm like, they're dying. That's why I did that. And then we're in a conflict because I'm trying to do thoughtful human caring and not just pushing a machine down the road, right? So I really found my niche in end-of-life care, because in the hospital system and in the sick care system, that's where I was able to step in and say, let's do what makes sense. Let's not do what we're told. Let's do what makes sense. I can have the tough conversation with the family about should we make them a do not resuscitate, do not intubate? Should we make them just comfort care? Should we do dialysis? Is that really a good idea? Because the outcomes aren't going to be so good here. Patient doesn't want it. Why are you pushing it on them? So I started asking those questions. I started doing that. And that's where I got a lot of love. That's where the attendings in the palliative care and hospice service were like, oh, this guy's good at this. Like he gets it. And it was really just lifestyle medicine. It was just the end of life, right? And so what we do is how to be healthier, how to maintain your health, when I say anti-aging medicine, I mean, I want to be healthy and thrive as long as I can. I want my patients to live a beautiful life. And then when it's time, they drop dead. That's a good life. Not rot in a nursing home and then get 20 procedures that go in and out of the hospital and then someone finally says, enough is enough. No, let's be thoughtful. Let's make a good plan for what that looks like so that they could have quality of life and not just circle the drain, as I say. So I almost went into hospice palliative care. I did that like a lot. I did a lot of rotations. I did extra training. And by the end of it, I was like, I don't need to do a fellowship. Again, they're just going to use and abuse me for a year, pay me 50 grand a year to bill $500,000 on my hours and effort and documentation and orders and all that. Like, I'm already doing it the way they're doing it. I don't need it. So I bailed. I finished my internal medicine training. I got my board certification. By then I was very sour. I was like, this is what you taught me? I had to go get a job. I got a job in the hospital, but I did not sign up for like these what they try to do is they get the young doctor, lock in 3 to 5 years. We're going to give you a bonus. We're going to give you this insurance, that insurance. And I looked at it and I'm like, if you just paid me a fair amount compared to the billing I'm doing, I don't need any of these benefits. I just need my money. Like, I'll take care of it. I'm okay. They didn't like that. So I'm like, all right, I'll work nights for a year or two. No contract. Just pay me my money. I don't want any of your nonsense. And that's what I did. I worked nights and I immediately opened Evolve Healthcare. Wow, and I would like work all night and I'd show up, I'd have like 1 or 2 patients, I'd see them and then I'd go sleep until my shift in the morning. And that was a good 1.5 to 2 years of bootstrapping Evolve Healthcare.
There's so many things to unpack in that story, and thank you for sharing.
Yeah, of course.
It, because there's a couple things, and there's some concordance that I think we've come to some similar conclusions. My background, of course, when I was, and people know this, I talk about it in a lot of my interviews. When I was 15, my sister got diagnosed with Hodgkin's disease, cancer of the lymph nodes, and I watched her. She was 4 years my senior, and over the next 4 years, I watched her go through the medical model until she died at the age of 22.
Oh my God, I'm sorry.
And so that impact on me, though, as a teenager in a formative year, is like, oh, wait a second, your health isn't a guarantee, and your life isn't a guarantee. Mm-hmm. And so that set me up to start exploring first high performance, and you went to university and studied exercise physiology and things like that, and to try and become, quote unquote, the healthiest version, which was more of a physical outline. And later on, that became more sophisticated and started learning the internal side of it. And
spiritual.
Yeah, and I made all these mistakes along that way. But recognizing that your life isn't a guarantee, I think, is such a powerful thing. This weekend, I am, literally after this episode we're doing, tomorrow I'm going out to visit a friend who's 80 years old. He's terminally ill. He called me up a few weeks ago. He says, hey, I ain't got much time. They're giving me, I told him, give me whatever drugs I need to stay upright for the next 30, 40 days or whatever I'm going to get. I'm throwing a party on my 80th birthday.
I love it.
This is life.
Yeah.
That's the deal. I'm going out like a warrior. And I think in the West, we've kind of sanitized death in a way that it's something that you don't see, it's put away, and everybody just leaves in the back of their kind of, back of their mind that we don't deal with that. And if we deal with it up front, there's a freedom that comes with it. And what it is not that if I'm going to die or when that is, because you can't always control that. It's more about how am I going to live? Mm-hmm. Like, how am I going to live with the very limited time that we get here? And, your work, I think, is a real testament to kind of, going right to the worst case scenario and just having those hard conversations. And I had those conversations with my sister because everybody was walking around with the eggshells.
And you had that bond.
Yeah, and we'd go someplace when she was feeling good, and I'd say, okay, when she got the terminal thing, I was like, what's that like? Like, how do you feel about this? There was anger and there was frustration, but the part that she said was the worst was everybody acting like it wasn't going to happen. That was the wan smiles and when things get better. And she goes, that was the part that was the hardest to deal with because her friends, family members, everybody, they were all acting like everything was going to be better, and it wasn't. And I always remembered that, and I've always been very straight and very blunt, and to a fault, I make all kinds of mistakes and I make lots of errors, but at least people know where they stand and how they go, and we work from there. How did you make that transition into the kind of the work that you're doing where you're going around seeing people, but you're also into this whole health optimization, biohacking kind of world, if you want to call that. I don't know what the proper terminology is.
Yeah. And to add to what you're saying, like, I think that we have completely divorced ourselves from the reality of life. Like, these digital republics, like you're discussing, they're not, yes, it's real. It's in the digital, but there is real life. There is reality. And I think that, 80 years ago, something like 20% of people would die in a hospital and 80% would die at home. And people understood death. They understood They saw it. It was a part of their life. And they understood that life is finite. And the choices you make have real consequences. And sometimes it's not even the choices. Shit happens and you get really sick. Like, chance. Who knows, right?
Accidents.
Accidents. I mean, anything could happen. And I think that from the beginning, I was connected with that reality, and I felt that, just like you're saying, people were not honest with patients. They were not honest with themselves. It was all about what you can do to preserve every second of life, at the cost of life, at the cost of quality of life. And I just couldn't understand it. I didn't understand how these people, everyone in this training environment, were so fixated on getting the diagnosis, managing the numbers. What do I do the next day when this number goes up or down? What do I do when this symptom presents itself? And it's like, you're missing the point. Like, this person in front of you is dying. We should be having a lot of, like, the majority of the care should be focused on what is going to happen and how can we give this person a beautiful end and not pretend that it's not going to happen. And I found that basically what I was trained to do in the majority of medical care is after you get sick and before you die. And that's what they're interested in. Sick care. Yes. I'm not the first person to say it, but like, that's what I saw. It's just sick care. And when it talked about health care or preventative care, it was give them 3 months of lifestyle modifications. I can't tell you how many questions I answered on board exams or whatever. The answer was always, if that was an option, A, B, C, D, 3-month lifestyle modifications and then meds, that was the answer. But what 3 months? First of all, 3 months, what are you talking about? But more so, like, what? They wouldn't teach me that. It was Mediterranean diet, pescatarian diet, exercise 5 days, but that was it. It was like the same superficial recommendations that you can find on, Medline or PubMed, whatever. Like, you could just Google it and the first thing that comes up, that's what we're teaching doctors when it comes to before they get sick. The only thing that they're interested in teaching is what happens when you get sick. What drug do you order? What specialist do you refer to? What procedures? How do you make the diagnosis? That was it. And then when it was time to tell the person that there's no more options, they wouldn't say that. They would offer stuff like feeding tubes or chemo or intubation that was never going to change the course. Everyone knew it, but no one wanted to acknowledge it. And then I became the guy that was always like, consult palliative care. Consult, like, what are you talking about? And those people would come in and do the meaningful care. So that's where I connected with it. When I started my primary care practice, I was telling you earlier before we started that, like, I didn't know what it was going to look like because they didn't teach me how to do preventative care. They didn't really teach me. I had 2 half days of clinic a week doing primary care in like a resident clinic. My attending was amazing. She was this really great healer. She was just like one of these people that, like, I'm so sorry, where you just talk to her and you feel better, right? And we had that, and so we connected, and she would always tell me, like, your patients are going to be so lucky to have you. But I had no idea what she was talking about because I was just like, I don't know, what hypertension, what's the next drug? I don't know, like, what do I need to check? What side effect do I need to be worried about? Because that's what was being pushed into my brain. That's what I was going to be tested on. There was no test to say, oh, he's really good with his patients. They really trust and care for him, and he cares and trusts for them, so they're more likely to be compliant. They're more likely to listen to recommendations. The real intervention is that. It's the humanistic part. It's the part where you're looking at someone in the eye and they feel you and you feel them, and you're like, this is a meaningful recommendation for you, not just what's on a list. So then over time, I started questioning what I was taught. I was like, well, what are my tools here in the primary care setting? What can I offer people? And that's when I started looking into nutrition. And frankly, it started with an argument. Brian Sanders, he's my business partner in Sapien. He's a influencer guy. We're making a documentary called Food Lies. We went on a snowboarding trip and we got in an argument about food. It was just an argument. He's a brilliant guy. He's an engineer, and he was just going down this rabbit hole of, reading books and podcasts and just like, holy cow. His family got really sick, his parents, and he started trying to figure out what was going on, and he landed on this nutrition thing. And that conversation, it was like 5 years ago, and it just changed my life, because that was where I was, there is a whole world out there. Biohacking, ancestral health, whatever, lifestyle medicine, functional medicine, integrated, whatever you want to call it.
Yes.
It's people saying, okay, sick care model, cool, you got that, but we're going to take care of people and try to keep them out of your hands. We're going to keep them out of the hospital.
Yes.
And that's my whole thing now, is I have a approach to nutrition that's sort of an integration of different ideas in our space. I started really talking about like acute versus chronic stress, leveraging high intensity interval training, cold therapy, heat therapy, deep breathing strategies, meditation. And it's just, I've been teaching myself. Like, I have now my community. Me and Brian are on the phone like multiple times a week. Our other business partner, Yaniv, we're just always in it. And I'm just learning. And every month when my patients come back to me, I've got something new. I've got another idea. And maybe it works for them, maybe it doesn't. But my whole thing is, I thought I was trained to be a scientist. I thought scientists question everything and come up with novel ideas. I did neuroscience before I went to medical school, and I published a bunch of stuff, and it really made me question and think for myself, and that's now what I do, and now I've embraced it. At first I was scared. At first I was like, oh my God, I'm going to give a recommendation for someone that stands against the American Heart Association or the American Diabetes Association or whatever this guru is talking about, and I was nervous. I was like, oh, are they going to come after me? And then I realized, no, I'm a doctor. It's the art of medicine. I get to use my brain. That's how this whole thing is. We still live in a free country. We still get to follow our spirit, our passion. That's why my parents brought me to America. And so I've leaned into it. And the outcomes with my patients, the response in the community, the support I get from our community, like we were talking about, it's incredible. It's transformed my practice. I brought other providers in that are learning, and you could just see the excitement and the passion. And it's like, you don't see that when you're in the hospital. You don't see that in these general primary care clinics when you're just pumping recommendations. It's frankly demoralizing. Mm-hmm. It's dehumanizing to physicians to be like, here's 20 patients, you got 15 minutes, and don't step out of bounds. Like, don't step out of bounds or else we're coming after you.
Right.
What?
You're in a regulatory box here.
15 years of training, 20 years of training for you to tell me what to do? Who? Administrator lady that like makes all the money but has no idea what I'm doing? You could feel my frustrations with that. But like, that's where I'm coming from. I'm like, I don't claim to know all the answers. I'm here to learn from you. Like, I'm here to learn every day. I learn from everyone I'm around. I learn from my patients. My patients come to me having listened to my podcast. They're like, have you heard about this guy? Have you heard about this book? No, let's go. Let's go. I'm first to admit, I don't know. I'm learning more about magnesium every day. Like, I'm learning and learning and learning. And I that's what I challenge my patients to do. I'm like, I can counsel you. We can do more intense counseling and more frequent. But in the end of the day, it's on you. Like, you go home and get loaded every day, don't exercise, watch TV, let that poison from the TV mess with your brain, break you down, then you don't sleep. I can't help you, right? But if you want some real life-changing stuff, I'm ready to give you guidance,
Funny you should say that. We were talking earlier with Brent Pella and JP Sears, who we sponsor their messages, and they just released a video called The Fitness Passport. It's a kind of a juxtaposition of the vaccine passport, which coming up. But you bring up a couple of interesting points here. Number one, your history, your family wanted to get out of a place where they were controlled. To come over here, you go into a very noble profession, find that there's control parameters in there. Your parents teach you not to question things. You question things, don't like the answers. Recognize that benefits sold to you are often the golden handcuffs that keep you locked into something. Go off into your own care, starting a business out of an argument, which is very similar to Matt and myself.
Business out of an argument.
Business out of an argument, which is fascinating. Because I think there's polarities in each thing, and to echo your points, I was over to see a friend of mine the other night who just had knee surgery. Great, medical care, knee surgery, awesome job.
Does a great job for that.
So I'm over there sitting just not far from here. I won't name the hospital. So the nurses come in and, you know, they're doling out, you know, how many perks he gets in the milligram dosage, which he's like, oh yeah, I'm in pain, give me some more perks.
Hook me up, yeah.
Right? And they're like, okay, we can give you this much, it's been this much time. And then it's like, oh, would you like anything to eat? Oh. And they're offering, well, we've got Jell-O, we've got ice cream, and I'm like, where's the science in Jell-O as a recovery product? I mean, you know, like, come on, man. Like, we're talking state-of-the-art technology. They use some lasers to like go into his knee. They got these super cameras. They've got all this like the unbelievable tech, and they're serving them Jell-O and ice cream as a recovery. I'm like, this is insane. This is absolutely. He's ordering food in. He's ordering food in from a health facility, so because he can't eat the food. He's I wouldn't say he's the healthiest guy, but he's healthy.
But he understands.
He understands. I can't. This isn't.
Sugar is not going to help me heal.
Sugar is not going to help me heal.
Right.
So,
really quick.
Yes.
It is one of my most sour points about the hospital system.
Yes.
Is they literally are poisoning their patients. It's a strong word, but when you provide really crappy food, when you call a high carb diet a heart healthy diet, when you are serving juices that aren't even like real juices, they're like concentrated garbage,
high corn fructose.
And okay, quick story because I want you to keep going. But so I'm in my third year of residency, and the gears are starting to turn. I have this patient who's a diabetic. His foot is rotting off. I'm trying to get him to surgery. Surgeon's not interested. He's just like, get him to surgery. What are the parameters? I got to like do a bunch of stuff so that he's safe to go under anesthesia. Sugars are like 300 or 400. Not going to take him to surgery with that. I go in, I'm like, what are you doing? Like, I keep turning on the insulin. How is your sugar still 400? I've doubled the insulin over 2 days. This is impossible. And he's like, I'm just eating what they give me. So I'm like, okay, interesting. Bring the dietitian in and the nurse, and I'm like, well, what are you guys doing? She's like, well, we're just feeding him off the carb-controlled diet. And I was like, so what is that? He's like, well, whatever they order on this diet, we add more insulin to compensate. And I'm like, okay, what's for lunch? Because I'm like, this guy's gonna die. He's septic. I have him on IV antibiotics. He needs to go to surgery. They won't take him if you don't listen to me. So they bring him in, and I'm like, okay, so what's lunch? I timed it so it would be lunch. They bring in a hamburger, full bun action, baked potato, full huge baked potato action, orange juice. And I'm like, what are you people doing? This is disgusting. This is not going to get him into surgery. He needs a very, very low carb diet. I didn't even know what a low carb diet was. I just knew
you can't give all the sugar to someone with diabetes.
A whole baked potato and sugar and a bun. So I got in it, and you know what the dietitian said? You're wrong. This is what we do. This is the right thing. My son is a hospitalist. I know what I'm talking about. I'm like, no, you don't, and your patient's going to die, and I'm going to document this conversation that you're telling me that this diet is appropriate when I went from 10 to 25 units and his sugar went up. That means you're giving him more food. That means you're letting him sneak food, and I talked to him about that, which, whatever, I can't blame the dietitian, but it's just this whole idea that, oh, you could eat whatever you want. We're just going to like control it with more insulin. No. That's how you die, and you become dependent on this hormone that you don't really need to pump into people if they're not eating crap. But you want to keep feeding them crap because you want to pretend that crap is acceptable. It's not acceptable. If it was now, it would have been very, very bad because I have a lot more information and knowledge and experience, and it wouldn't have gone well because I would have been much more aggressive to protect my patient. Yes. I don't care about my intellectuality. It's about the patient. This guy was literally dying. That's why it's such a memorable story, is this whole conversation is happening in the context of a guy who's hypotensive, low blood pressure, tachycardic, high heart rate, pumping fluids, pumping antibiotics into him, and you're feeding him a hamburger. What are you talking about right now? So that issue of food in the healthcare centers is one that's like very personal to me, and I've been trying through our Sapien platform to promote bringing in bone broth, like a boosted bone broth, a bone broth with some collagen, with some vitamins, to replace glucerna or these like basically protein sugar drinks that all the old people and sick people get that don't help promote healing. And I'm like, you need to promote healing with protein and healthy fat. And you know how hard it is to have that conversation, because they're like, well, the glucerna is 20 cents a bottle and your bone broth is like $2 a bottle. We can't afford that. And I'm like, what are you talking? Like, your patients are dying. So anyway, just to add to it.
Let's talk about Sapien and how this emerged out of this frustration. And I always say that the challenges that anybody faces in life is often an invitation to find your greatest skills and abilities. And sometimes we need a punch in the head or a really tough obstacle. Sounds like you found it. Talk a bit about Sapien, this platform that you're working on.
Sapien, like, it was just an idea. It was just like, wow, we want to promote ancestral medicine, ancestral health. We want to.
What is so? Let's unplug that unpack that a little bit. What is ancestral medicine from your definition?
From my definition, it's looking at the past and starting with this premise. We are a very, very successful creature. We dominated the planet. We continued to grow and grow and grow as hunter-gatherers. We were very good at surviving. Yes, there were things that killed us, infections, accidents, but we knew how to eat. Our bodies are very adapted to survive and be happy. I don't believe in that idea of the caveman that's like miserable and everyone's dying. No, like we are very, very adapted at survival. We're adapted at eating and then not eating. We're adapted at different climates. We know how we have thousands and thousands of years of success as a human species. And then you start with agriculture, and then you start with Western medicine, and the quality of life goes down, kind of what you were alluding to. The quality of life of the average person goes down. They might live longer, but it's not a better life. And the further down we go this path, you get further disconnected from your actual biology. So now we live lives that are very disconnected from our biology. We're not connected with our environments. We're not following the patterns of light and sun, and we're not understanding our food system. We're not connecting with the dying process and the birth process and everything that goes in between. We're sort of living in these insular experiences, and I think that's where the problem lies. So when I started thinking about all this stuff, the way I was able to separate my education, my Western medicine education, from these new ideas, where all these new ideas were old ideas. They were things my dad and his dad's dad did to be healthy, right? It's like what my great grandmother would feed me. I grew up eating liver and onions. I grew up eating fish roe. I grew up eating fermented vegetables. These were parts of my traditional food system. And then I look back and I'm like, oh, all the traditional food systems had this because we knew. We evolved with our planet. And so that's what it is to me. So Sapien is our version of trying to educate people about this perspective on health. It's a platform for us to get different influencers and ideas, different doctors, just people in our space to connect. We started a tribe because there's lots of folks that follow us and they want more access. So we do Zoom calls and we connect with people that way and give them access to me and Brian and our whole team. Our podcast wanted a platform to live, so that like the Peak Human podcast and the Sapien podcast, they're all coming from the same place. So they come from Sapien. And we thought that word really, we were surprised that no one had used it in this space, because it really just says it all, right? It's like what we need to remember. You are a Homo sapien. That is what you are. You've been that for hundreds of thousands of years. And it evolved over millions of years. And that's where you need to look to understand. And that's, again, the idea there too with Sapien is it's not to throw away Western medicine. It's not to say like,
it's a great tool in certain, like acute care. It's incredible.
That's where it came from, right? World War I, people were coming back. They were dying from injuries. They didn't have good sanitation practices. They didn't know how to use the antibiotics they had.
Infections,
all that
amputations,
stuff, acute
all these
stuff,
things,
emergency stuff that we now associate with emergency medicine, essentially. And that's where Western medicine was formed. And that's where the double-blind placebo control study comes from, is trying to understand how to best utilize these tools, especially medicines. But 100 years later, we think that that is all that healthcare is. And we train doctors to think that, which I think is hurting people by not giving them. And so I'm a doctor of osteopathic medicine. I fell into osteopathic medicine.
Can you explain osteopathic medicine for our listeners?
Most people know medical doctor, MD. Very, very, very competitive to get to MD programs. About 80 years ago, this guy, A.T. Stills, he was an MD, and he was like, well, I don't want to give everyone arsenic. I think that if I manipulate people's bodies and I do different modalities, I can help the body come into its own homeostasis. And that's one of the principles of osteopathic medicine is your body wants to go to homeostasis. Your body wants to be healthy. It's not trying to be sick.
It's genetically evolutionary designed to produce health, provided you provide the circumstances and materials in order
the
to
right
do
inputs.
That, right?
So that's where osteopathic medicine came from. Then there was something that happened called the Flexner Reports, and basically they started because there was also a lot of like voodoo doctors. There was just it was like a free for all when it came to medicine.
Right.
So there is the government got involved, appropriately so, I think, and started weeding out like this isn't a medical school. This is crazy, but it was very, very, very biased towards the Western medicine profession because that was evidence-based. I think it was, again, reasonably so at that time. And it pushed osteopathic schools, which were popping up, which were, again, it was medical training plus some of these alternative treatments. And that's what it still is today. But it really pushed it to the fringes. Then come 70s, 80s, and 90s, it's very expensive to make medical schools. MD programs are very competitive, and we needed more doctors. So the osteopathic profession was able to train more doctors. And literally in the last 5 years, there's been a merging of the two. So nowadays, MD, DO, it's an equivalent degree in America and in many, many countries around the world. The training is equivalent. It used to be that there was like an MD, internal medicine residency, which is actually what I did. And then there's like a DO, osteopathic versus allopathic, which is MD. And now they're all governed by the same body because we need doctors. Like we need to train doctors. It's very expensive. And this is a way to kind of bring the two together. I came into osteopathic medicine, frankly, because I was not trying to be a doctor. I did music. I did neuroscience research. I was in a lab at University of UCLA psychology department that I did some great work at. And so coming into the application process, there's like 45 things you've got to check off. And they're really looking for those people that are like committed to medicine from the beginning and have done everything. I think that trains very inexperienced people that end up being doctors that have a hard time connecting with people. Whatever, that's my personal experience. We shouldn't go there because that's different. But I ended up in an osteopathic program because I was this well-rounded guy. I had a good MCAT score, and they're like, you have a good personality. You could be a good doctor. And they brought me in, Arizona College of Osteopathic Medicine in Glendale. And I actually was like biased towards it too. I was like, I just want to be a doctor. Like, I don't know about this stuff. But look at me now, like all of this training, opening me up to meditation, opening me up to manipulative medicine, opening me up to herbal medicine, all sorts of different modalities that I integrate now. We got like touches of it, like just a little bit, but it was part of my training.
Right.
And that made me more open-minded. And I think it makes osteopathic physicians more open-minded because some of this stuff that's considered fringe or woo-woo or whatever you want to call it is actually part of our training. And so some doctors end up going that path. There's a lot of functional medicine doctors that are osteopaths. And some doctors don't. They end up going and doing traditional stuff, and that's okay too. We need doctors, like we need healthcare providers. So it's not about poo-pooing one or the other. It's just about understanding that there's a system in place, and it's really driven at making doctors that are employees that follow the rules, that make money for insurance companies and big companies. And then there's a few of us that are like, I'm going to do it on my own.
Couple things. When you refer to Sapien, I always think of the great book Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari.
That's where I was inspired.
And
yes.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, I was
and
inspired
he's written 3 incredible books. Homo Deus, and then 21 Lessons for the 21st Century. And he's a very deep thinker. And here we are as sapiens, and he kind of gets into this in Homo Deus, which is we are at an evolutionary crux. And so we've now become so technologically advanced. We have two branches which are really emerging, and we don't know what's happening. And that is, we have to become Homo digitalis, essentially, which is kind of the Elon Musk version, where we become fused with artificial intelligence so much that we actually don't know where the AI begins and the human ends. They become the singularity, as Ray Kurzweil says. And then we have this other area when you start getting into genetic manipulation, CRISPR genes.
Yes.
And so if you're a historian, you understand that there was these various different types of hominid species, upright species. Most famous might be the Neanderthals, but there's Homo florentis and these
Homo
other...
erectus, yeah.
Yeah, so there was these different
so
species
good.
that competed, and then Homo sapien came out, and we still have bits of genetics from these other areas, but for the most part, like Neanderthal, I think, is 2% of the population.
Well, that's new evidence. That's new evidence that Neanderthals are in, I think, 80% of people carry some percent of their DNA, and we thought they were a separate species that didn't
Correct.
intermingle, and now I was listening to Yuval talking recently. He's like making the Sapiens, the book, like a graphic novel is what they're making it.
Well, there's a great book called Clan of the Cave Bear, which was a French writer, Jean-M. Aoul, and she actually wrote a historical interaction between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals,
Really?
and a really cool story about how this woman, I read it as a kid, and it was a fascinating way to learn about history. It was told as a story, but it was this girl whose family was killed in an earthquake, and she was picked up by a Neanderthal tribe and integrated with this Neanderthal tribe, and then was cast out of the Neanderthal tribe because the way they processed their brain, their memories and emotions were different than her. She went on this whole journey, and so it's a really
Cool.
story. And then
Way ahead of its time.
Way ahead of its
Way
time.
ahead
And
of
so
its time.
it's a very interesting thing. But going back to my point, as a bodybuilder, my background was in bodybuilding, and I say we were the original biohackers because
Yeah.
a bodybuilder is fighting evolutionary biology. You do not want to build extraordinary levels of muscularity. You do not want to have super physiological levels of body fat, which is the tenets of performance in that sport. And to do that, you have genetic limiters that hold back, that you have to overcome through training and diet manipulation and all these kind of practices, these hacks, these experiments, and you run experiments. And so you
100%
instantly start doing that. And then now we've evolved with, okay, now people are coming up with disease states from the modern world, variances within their genetics and epigenetics. They're in a situation and they're going, okay, well, I need to find this balance between maybe what's right for my ancestry, which was based on my genetics and epigenetic responses. What is my toxic level because of the modern world and the dysfunction that I'm currently living because of, just going along with the world. And then these new emerging sciences of, digital information, whether it's feedback loops or neurofeedback, which can enhance cognitive capabilities and overcome all sorts of psychological illnesses. Or we now have, in particularly in the bodybuilding world and also in the Olympic level with a lot of countries, we're getting into full-on genetic manipulation.
Wow, really?
Yeah, so right now there is a group of bodybuilders out of the Middle East which have gotten CRISPR genes, and they've changed and they've turned off the limiters for muscle growth, and so like and now you can download this stuff on the internet for $150 and start playing with your genes. And so we're heading into the mutant land. The mutants are coming.
And that's what Homo Deus is talking about.
Well, yeah, and so we're right on the crux, and I believe that there's going to be a variety of experiments that go wrong, that people will, exit out. As a medical doctor who's on the bleeding edge of people who want to live their best life, maybe extend their life, but certainly optimize it, how do you navigate this milieu of possibilities and opportunities? Do you have a process where you kind of find out where the person is and take them forward? Do you just deal with that individual person? Do you have a philosophy? Kind of unpack that for me, because I'm curious about where do we go from here as someone that, I'm sitting there going, okay, I'm coming into 50, when do I hit testosterone replacement therapy, right? I'm not where I'm 20s. I haven't hit that button yet. My business partner has. Many of the people in the hacking community have. Does a person use metformin or not?
Good question.
Okay, neurofeedback. I've had extraordinary results on neurofeedback. I think it's the tech of the future.
And I've seen some people fall apart and end up in psych wards with that stuff.
Correct, because I've seen the research on that some people have.
I've seen it.
We see also with plant medicines. So
psychedelic medicine.
Psychedelic medicines we know have profound effects, but we also know that there is a major shift in personality for some people, particularly in openness, that for some types, like the neurotic types, can be devastating for their lives. And then we have these digital integrations and genetic manipulations, and now they're talking about nanobots and machines and stuff like that. And here we are in the world where we are now, the government is basically forcing people through social conditioning to take on a new type of quote-unquote vaccine that has no legal consequences if it fails with this mRNA DNA, and people are being shamed into doing this, or to get back the quality of life that I want so I can travel or do this.
So being like
I'm going to go that
stick.
way. So I just opened up 8 different loops on that conversation. Just feel free to kind of unload as a doctor in this world where you're trying to help people live a better life.
And now for a Bioptimizers fixed digestion tip. Supercharge your protein shake. Everyone knows protein shakes are a great way to sneak in extra protein, build more muscle, even replace meals and burn more fat. The problem is the highest quality protein typically absorbs at around 40%. One way to fix this and dramatically increase how quickly and effective your protein shake digests is to add 2 to 3 capsules of Masszymes into your shake. One research study showed that pre-digested protein during a meal increased muscle growth significantly. To take advantage of this, just blend the open capsules into your shake, and within 15 minutes or less, the enzymes will have begun to break down the protein into amino acids. This can make your shakes at least 2 to 3 times more potent. Some people do this and sip on their shake while lifting to provide their muscles with a steady stream of amino acids during their workout. To save 10% on Masszymes, use the code SHAKE10, that's SHAKE10, at Masszymes.com. That's SHAKE10 at Masszymes.com.
Yeah, I mean, to start with, I think the majority of my recommendations are more focused on these ancestral hacks. So behaviors and changes to your day-to-day life that actually bring you closer to your ancestral roots. So that's a little different, I think, than the biohacking and sure. the bodybuilders and the high-performance athletes. I think that's not really my thing yet, although I keep learning and keep adding, and I do like IV therapy. I'm a big fan of NAD plus therapy. I'm sure that's across your space.
The carnivore kind of stuff.
Yeah,
like do you like the multiple days with the fast bites after, or do you just do the little bit at a time? How do you like that?
I keep adding to it. So when it comes to biohacking stuff, because there's not a lot of evidence and you kind of have to pick and choose.
It's experimental. Let's face it, we're running experiments. Sure. That's why I compared it to the bodybuilders. Bodybuilders are running experiments. They said steroids didn't work for 20 or 30 years, the medical association. Meanwhile, guys are out breaking records and running. It's like, no, they work.
They work. They definitely work.
They got consequences, but they work.
So I think for me, I do it myself. Like I'm a person that experiences life, and so when it comes to things like NAD+, I never put it on my menu. I learned about it. I did a program on it. I then did it myself. I then did it with some of my doctor friends that were into this biohacking stuff. And I was like, oh, this is very clearly a powerful intervention. Figured out, okay, these are the kind of patients I would offer it to. And that's what I do. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of become a new addition to my practice. Dr. Conover, like you were mentioning, he's way down that rabbit hole and he has so much more experience. So he has different protocols. And I love that. And when I have more time, I would love to learn more, and maybe just through osmosis and time, I will learn more. I do things like vitamin C infusions, glutathione infusions. So anyway, that's that. Yep. That's that thing. But
which are powerful immune boosters, which during this whole thing we haven't.
Oh my God.
What part that really annoys me is they haven't shared with the population the things that bolster our natural immune system response, and the data is pretty evident.
Vitamin D.
Vitamin D. If you're, the people who suffer the most are people who have low vitamin Ds and are obese. Those are the
hyperglycemia too. Yeah.
Yeah. These are the biggest comorbidities about this stuff. And there's virtually no information in the public domain. And most of this is relatively inexpensive. It's very cheap.
But that's why they're not promoting it.
Correct.
Right? So from the beginning, the data was really obvious. And I was already on my vitamin D3 K2 kick. Like I figured that out through Dr. Joel Gould, who's a brilliant guy that I've had on my podcast. He's a dentist actually, and he considers himself. Anyway, he put me on that. I learned about it. I read all the papers. And then COVID comes and it's like overwhelmingly that if your vitamin D is greater than 30 and even closer to more like a physiological level 45, you don't go to the hospital. My patients didn't go to the hospital. Like I started them on zinc. So the way I think about it is control what you can control. Like there are a bunch of things you can do for free essentially or very cheap to modify your risk factors. You can lose weight and drop your sugar intake and your carbohydrate intake and drop your hyperinsulinemia, lose weight, you're no longer a high-risk patient. You can take your vitamin D3 K2 or spend healthy amounts of time in the sun, thoughtfully understanding how to do that, get your vitamin D that way. You can exercise. A bunch of papers just came out showing that just a little bit of exercise every week, your risk goes down like crazy. All free, essentially free.
Yes, very low cost.
Lifestyle modifications that similar to the supplements like your zinc and quercetin and vitamin C and vitamin D, very, very cheap, not owned by companies. I have my own vitamin D that I get from a supplier that's really lovely and we sell it on our Sapien platform. I can do that. You can do that. It's not a big deal. You can go buy it in a drugstore, but you got to make sure there's no vegetable oil in there because that's what they're starting doing. And
I know. Right? Yeah, that's
it's disgusting.
Right, yeah.
But the idea being is here's our cheap interventions that are going to. I think they don't promote it because it cuts into the vaccine game. I think promoting this vaccine is very important for a million reasons we don't need to get into, but that's the goal here: get everyone vaccinated. So I think promoting what we're talking about here cuts into that bottom line and. That's why, like Dr. Fauci doesn't want to talk about it because it gets in the way of his money making. So I don't like that guy. Moving on.
He's not. I don't have any posters on my wall of Dr. Fauci.
I have not liked him from day one.
Well, I looked back to his history and his results with HIV and AZT and the whole thing, and then some of the people that he associates with it, vaccinations in Ethiopia and things with the World Health Organization, and then his questionable funding of the actual gain of function research after being deterred in the last administration, or not the last administration, the Obama administration, and then continuing forward, and then flip-flopping. I think he should be the #1 poster boy for a flip-flop advertisement because I think he's the best flip-flopper
I don't understand how everyone's not irate about this guy. I mean, irate.
Yeah. It's crazy. And I think that's the big thing is I have a naturopathic
gain
doctor.
of function
research.
That was so obvious. Sorry, not to interrupt you, but I just want people to understand that if you go and you listen to people that understand about virology, understand about the genomics of these viruses and how these things come to be in our society, it is not a question. I've been saying this for months and months and months and months, and everyone in our community has, because when you listen to the virologists, it's very clear that this was a multiple gain of functions that would never be possible in a natural biological environment, wet market or not.
Yes.
It was always manufactured in a lab. Like, there is no question about it. And the fact that it's been a year and a half and we're finally seeing someone going, oh, we should explore the Wuhan theory. What are you talking about? This is lies. This is not a question. It's obvious. It's the only possible explanation. It's the only plausible explanation, period. And this guy straight up lied to everyone. He got their trust, and now he's flip-flopping. And instead of being like, this guy's a liar, he doesn't know what he's talking about, everyone's just like, oh, okay. Come on, everyone. Let's be more upset.
Let's hold someone with that much sway, an unelected official who happens to be the highest paid government official there is, who may be incentivized to protect what he was doing on the sly. I know there's a congressional investigation going on. I've been watching some of the stuff, and you don't see this on the mainstream news. You don't see this in those channels, and then the people who are talking about oftentimes get taken off. But we kind of went down a rat hole there. Let's get down to
my approach,
your approach, and in the world today, how do people be healthy? What are the decisions? And how? I'd also like to know how do they leverage someone like yourself in their life to provide that voice of reason and that voice of experience, who can actually look through a series of study or research or information or make critical analysis, because critical analysis is it's very hard to overcome your biases, and most people don't even know that they have biases.
Yeah, I mean, my personal approach with every patient, and what do I introduce to them? Do I introduce intermittent fasting or some of these biohacking things? Is I meet people where they're at. And that's how I train my nurse practitioners and any student that's with me. If you walk in there with an agenda, like, oh, I see an A1C, a blood sugar that's super high, I'm gonna go in there and treat their diabetes, and you walk into this person and they do not care, you're not gonna make a meaningful intervention. So part of it is you have to spend a few minutes, get a feel for where is this person in their healthcare journey, and meet them there. You can't pull someone to the healthy side or whatever side. You cannot do that. That is, you don't have enough time, and even if you had a bunch of time, you have to show people a path and let them find their way. So number one, meet them where they're at. If they want to talk about food, I'll talk about food. If they're here to get prescribed for drugs and get their refills and they don't care about lifestyle intervention, fine. Maybe I start there, and maybe at some point I can get through to them that, like, hey, we can get you off some of these drugs if you just do a couple of things. Some people come to me ready to do like 45 things, and I'm like, okay, that's cool. Let's start with a couple and let's work our way into there. So I think number one is meeting people where they're at. I can't stress that enough, and that requires a personality and a skill with people that should be selected for when you're picking doctors, and not just intellectuality, but interpersonal skills. I think that would probably be the main thing. And then as far as introducing people to other stuff, for me, it always starts with the basics. Like if you're not eating correctly, you're not going to succeed with working out. If you're not sleeping, you're not going to succeed with eating right, because you're going to be stressed out. So I really start with like my 5 basic principles, which is nothing novel here, but it's sun, sleep, movement, stress, and food. Like that's it. If you haven't addressed those 5 things, what are you doing even getting an NAD plus drip? You need to like do the basics and then layer up.
Well, yeah, because I think that's another thing. I think a lot of people think they can biohack their way out of bad lifestyle choices, and I think it's easy to kind of fall into that trap, because you're just actually taking what we've learned in kind of a medical model and applying it, quote unquote, to a biomedical model. Well, you know what? I ate like crap today, but I went out partying all night, but I can go down and I can do some NAD drips and pound some vitamin C and hook myself into a hyperbaric chamber for an hour, and I feel great again.
Yeah, you got it.
But we're not monitoring maybe the cellular damage. And hey, I'm all for, hey, I blew the system out and getting these hacks, but foundational components is different. With Evolve Health as one of the components, because I think we're kind of getting into this thing, is Evolve Health. What is that about, and how does it connect to the things that you're doing around ancestral health and Sapien and these sort of stuff? Like, what's that all about?
So Sapien is an education platform, and our dream is to have a facility like yours where people could come and enjoy themselves. We're making a documentary called Food Lies. It's about getting my name out there and getting me to help. Because if I'm going to help the most amount of people, it's going to be on podcasts, on TV, writing a book, something like where you can really touch as many people as possible with education. And Evolve is my clinical practice. It's where I actually have patients and I execute my recommendations. It started as a very traditional, I take insurance, I have my medical assistants, all the basic things, but over the last few years, it's developed into this sort of ancestral lifestyle medicine approach. It's increasingly getting busy, and I still invite everyone who's listening. You can make an appointment with me or my nurse practitioner still under insurance if you're in the Los Angeles area. But what I'm working towards is actually moving towards a model where, it's very hard, like I said, but you meet people where they're at, right? So especially after the pandemic, people are really, really struggling. And I spend the vast majority...
What are they struggling with?
Mental health.
So to talk to me about mental health, because you've done a lot of experience in this. What are the kind of things that people are suffering from mental health-wise?
I look at depression and anxiety as the spectrum of the same thing. It just depends on how you process it. Some people are future thinkers. They worry about the future. That's anxiety. Some people are looking at the past and questioning what they've done, and that's depression. When you think about like Eastern medicine and Eastern religious philosophy, it's about finding that balance, right? Yeah. You know about the past, you can be a little sad about it, you can worry and plan, but like you should try to live in the middle, find that balance. So I think what it's done is it's ripped people to the sides. People are incredibly anxious. I've never seen more people have panic attacks. I've never had to prescribe drugs, because when you can't control some of these lifestyle things, when you have a terrible financial situation, when you have a relationship that's falling apart, because of the circumstances, sometimes you need a benzo to relax and get in a good night's sleep. Sometimes you need to start a sleep aid. It's okay. It's okay to use those drugs, sometimes thoughtfully. So what I've just seen people is really having nervous breakdowns, panic attacks. I've seen people who are on the cusp of like being depressed, just completely lose it. People that were following with me, exercising, doing their sun exposure, afraid to go outside, so their depression runs crazy, and there's no drug that's going to pull them out of that. And it's terrible to watch. It's incredibly taxing as a healthcare provider, because every visit becomes these heavy visits where often there is no solution. It's just like realize where you're at and start working towards the light, I can only tell people to like spend time in the sun and run outside and like stop being afraid of each other so much. So it's been a really tough year from that standpoint. I'm starting to think about working at least part of my schedule towards people that are that are really interested in what I'm doing, coming in and spending more time. So like a different model where there's like a cash model where I can spend an hour or two with one patient that's really ready to go to these next levels and dive into everything I can offer. My whole philosophy has always been the most access that I can offer people. But what's becoming unfortunate is that as the reimbursement from our insurances are so low that I have to see so many patients to even just break even, that it's becoming really, really difficult. So I'm trying to do where I have a physician extenders, like nurse practitioners that I've trained in my sapient approach and my approach to medicine, to be able to take care of more of those people and give myself access to people that are like ready to go deeper, because sometimes I'll get all fired up like with you here, and I'll talk to a patient for 45 minutes and get behind in the day. And then I look at them and they're either overwhelmed or they haven't really processed it. And I'm like, damn, like it's kind of a waste, Right. So as I go deeper and I learn more and I get more confident with what I'm doing, I'm trying to create it where I can really get to those people that are ready to go there, but still offer a really meaningful experience with the rest of the practice. It's just ever evolving. It's changing like day to day. You can ask my staff. Every day I'm trying to figure out how I can reach more people and do a better job.
What is the profile, would you say, of someone who is successful working with you versus someone who isn't? I think that's like, I would always look at studies, and I'm a contrarian thinker and a hyper optimist, and that's got me into a lot of trouble. It's an interesting combination. So people would say, well, there's a 98% chance that you are going to fail at this thing. And I'm like, okay, well, who are the 2% that succeeded? And what did that 2% do? And can I replicate that on some level? Because we sometimes look at numbers as static figures and we defer to the statistics. And, if you look at a bell curve of distribution of everything, there are commonalities in that top of the bell curve as well as the bottom of the bell curve, and I've always been interested in that particular point. What are the practices? What are they doing? How do they learn? Who are they listening to? What's their psychology? What's their genetic? What is their dietary practice? What are they doing to me, it's uncoding that to be what we call biological optimization, to live at our best level, right? To have the properties in our body and they're flowing in the right qualities and quantities so that I can express this genetic wonder. I mean, the human body is, I mean, you
Amazing.
get born and you got 80 years of just,
Maybe
it
more
fixes itself. Maybe, like, you know, it's really incredible.
Yeah.
What do you found that people that really get it, what is the key element?
So a bunch of stuff. I would say the number one thing is being open-minded, right? Like myself. I think you have to, this is the thing I said, you have to accept that 90% of what you were taught about health is bunk.
Right.
You have to accept that breakfast is the most important meal of the day, was made up by a food company and isn't a marketing campaign. And just because you've had 10 doctors reiterate that does not make it science or meaningful or a good idea. And then accepting that so much of what you've been programmed is just nonsense. So that's step one. That's really, really challenging. The next step is cut out the noise. So many people, they'll hear me, but then they'll go home and they'll talk to their family or loved ones.
Right.
And they're like, no, but my doctor says you have to be on a statin too, and your LDL has to be this low or else you're gonna die from a heart attack. You gotta cut that out. When I tell you your HDL is 85, and I don't care what your LDL is, and your triglyceride HDL ratio is beautiful, you're not at risk, and you don't need this drug that has side effects, like real side effects. You got to block out that noise. You got to move forward into your own health journey, and that's going to be tough. It's tough. Like, it was tough for me to go out on my own and like tell my doctor friends, sorry guys, like I don't agree with this anymore. Accept it or not, I'm moving on. But the patient has to do that. And then most people that really, really, really change their lives have had something happen that have pushed them over the line. Like they've seen the Western medicine model destroy one of their family's existence. They've seen their own health problems and how like inept and unable to change it, or someone inspired them. So then there's also these guys like yourself, like some of the people we've mentioned, that are just inspirational people that are like, there's another way. And then they come to me because someone touched them. There's this really amazing guy, Dr. Bill Schindler. He's an anthropologist, a PhD anthropologist in Maryland, and he basically talks about our ancestry, Homo habilis, Homo erectus, how we evolved, and how what we eat and how we should eat is very clear in our history, our scientific history, and that we don't need all these double-blind placebo-controlled studies to tell you that eating a bunch of sugar and vegetable oils is bad for you. And so he's a guy who inspires people, the way he talks, the way he communicates. I try to replicate him in a lot of ways or learn from him. And so guys like that, they inspire people. They turn their light on, and then they're open, and then, like Bill will say, go see Dr. Gary. He'll help you now go to the next level. So I have a lot of people that come from those kind of people. Even Brent, will send folks along that, So I think those are the three main things. You got to open your mind and drop the old ideas. You got to block out the noise, the stuff that you're getting blasted on social media, the family, the friends that are like trying to slow you down. And then you got to be inspired. That inspiration comes from a multitude of things. Maybe it's this podcast for some people, or maybe it's an experience like you had in your childhood, right? Where you saw these problems, and then you're like,
I needed to find solutions.
I gotta find a solution. So I think that's probably the majority of people. It's fun.
As far as profiling people from an optimal health thing, is there any particular tests or modalities that they like? What are the things that you like to rely on to determine, hey, you know what, you need to make some lifestyle changes here, or what might those challenge or changes might entail based on the data that you are able to grab?
So first and foremost, before even any data, if someone feels there's something wrong. It's like not that complicated. They know, right? Another thing is I try to teach people to expect yourself to thrive, not just survive, right? So realize how beautiful this body and this mind is and your spirit, and that you can really feel great all the time. And if you're not, that's where we can do better. But then to more technical stuff. So other than looking at the basic metabolic markers, I really like fasting insulin levels as a marker of metabolic health.
Do you do like Homo IR or anything like that?
I sometimes, yeah. I think as I move more towards a cash model and more towards people that are ready to go, I'll move into some of the more interesting labs, the more extensive lipid panels, for example, and looking some of those patterns. But you can gather so much information from a CBC, a blood count, a CMP, liver, kidneys, an A1C is still a pretty good test. I get a CRP on most patients because that inflammatory marker is really meaningful and tells us way more than just cardiovascular risk or infection. Sometimes I get an ESR, sedimentation rate. That's also an inflammatory marker that sends me down one path or another. A fasting insulin, which is so many doctors refuse to order, but the more I learn about it, it's the earliest marker of metabolic problems. And so we know even from COVID that it's hyperinsulinemia that's the problem, right? So before your A1C, your blood sugars are high, you can have high insulin, and I can intervene at that point before you're medically sick or diagnosed with diabetes or prediabetes. So that's a really interesting marker. I look at other things in like the CBC, like the RDW, which is a marker of your red blood cell health, and that can tell you that we have some work to do here or there. I always look at vitamin D. I've been doing this for years now. Right. It's so important, and you just see, I can look at someone, they're
vitamin or hormone, which would you call it?
Hormone. It's a hormone. I'm done trying to convince everyone to call it hormone D. It's vitamin D.
Yes.
It's vitamin D. But I always emphasize like vitamin D3, and it has to go with K2, and you have to understand that the B vitamins play a role, and magnesium is so important, and our food system is depleted in it, and we have to supplement these things. And so a lot of people in my nutrition space are like, you don't need supplements if you eat right. I'm like, if you live on a different planet, if you live in Los Angeles, and even if you're going to Erewhon or some of the fancier places, you have to supplement. You really do. Unless you're living your whole life and you're rich and you can just live your whole life to feed your body and spirit and mind, but most people don't have that freedom. So supplementation is really, really important.
I always invite people to take a SpectraCell test.
SpectraCell's great.
And hey, look, there it's going to reveal what vitamins and minerals that you may be deficient on or have a hard time absorbing, and start there. And almost always, and I hate to use the word always, but almost everyone will have a deficiency somewhere, even if they're supplementing. And when you expose it and then you address that systematically, there is very often, to almost 100%, there are improvements in the function of that person's life and the quality of their life. And that, to me, I always like, that starts to trigger things, right?
Yeah, but again, in my practice so far, because I don't go that deep and people are trying to use insurance, one thing is interesting is Quest started doing some of the, Quest is the insurance lab, and they started doing SpectraCell type studies. SpectraCell is actually declining their options because these bigger labs are starting to bring it in, because I think people are getting wise to how these labs can help you. But I mean, I also think like most, if not everyone, should be on a nice B100, B complete, like a really clean B vitamin. Everyone should be on a vitamin D3, K2. A good magnesium complete, multiple magnesium salts.
We have one of those.
I know, and it's fantastic, and I've been using it for the last few months. I love it. I really do. I've replaced my old one from Claire Labs with yours, and I love it.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
B, D with K, magnesium. Some people, especially with low HDLs, I put on fish oil.
Yep.
Especially if I can't push them to change their omega-3 fatty acid intake through diet. Those are kind of the main ones. I'm a huge fan of vitamin C. I have this supplement that's vitamin C with CBD with it's a really great anti-inflammatory.
CBD is such a great delivery system, right? That's what I think. I think where the CBD as a delivery item for everything else, because of the endocannabinoid system. I had Len May in here recently, where we did genetic overlays with the endocannabinoid system to determine which CBDs, because now we're finding there's families of them, are actually right for you.
Cool.
And when you stack those, and I have various CBDs that I'll use to drive my vitamin supplementation, and I can feel the difference when I do that. It's like, okay, it's not just about the product, it's about can you digest, absorb, and deliver it to the cells, the target where you need to. And of course, I think there's going to be a lot more
I need to learn about that.
Yeah, it's really, really cool. I would, Len May, it's called the, I'll give you the research. It's endocannabinoid test. It's forget what the name of the test is, but you just overlay it with your genetic testing, and then it can reveal all this stuff.
I like just to comment on that. I've been a proponent of marijuana as a tool for people to use forever. How do you have a medical system that has ignored an entire hormone system that affects every part of your body?
Yes.
And completely ignored it until a few years ago. Even though we've known it can help with mood, it can help with seizures, it can help with so many things, just to name a few that most people will know about. How did we vilify that plant and then not research the endocannabinoid system, even though we knew there was meaningful medical intervention? Like, that concept alone is so alarming to me. And then when you extend that into the world of psychedelic medicine, where you have these powerful tools that, yes, you have to be careful with, but the power of psilocybin is overwhelmingly beneficial, and the evidence is coming, and it's getting decriminalized, and it's changing people's lives. And then there's some synthetic compounds like ketamine and MDMA that can be
Dr. Dan and his work around that stuff,
such a powerful modality, if you put it, like for the psychedelic medicine, and I would include marijuana in that space, or alternative drug medicine, I don't know, but because why? Because we want to sell a pill that you have to take every day that it suppresses your mood and numbs you, and that's better than healing you.
Correct.
So that's my whole stance on the mental health sphere, is not only are we dropping the ball by not having a focus on therapy and a focus on real interpersonal experiences and like building that community for people to have outreach, but the real powerful healing medicines, they're only coming now. They're only starting. A lot of it was driven by the VA, who just watched people dying and killing themselves, and they're like, we got to do something. I guess we're going to study MDMA because there's some great research from Israel that suggests that it could really help these soldiers. Okay, and now it's overwhelmingly evident that that is a great option for these guys and so many people. And now after COVID, you're going to have so many people suffering PTSD, like syndromes, because they've been stuck in the house for a year and a half. Give them a meaningful tool. Like, let's go. Let's let go of this archaic idea of medicine or of using medicines, and let's bring in the ancient ideas of medicines. You know what I mean? Back to sapien.
I've always had this thought: if that we enforce that anyone who is going to dictate our society need to experiment with plant medicines themselves, I think we'd run into far less of the troubles that we have to get a more expansive view. That being said, we always, with the caveat, setting, quality of the practitioner, quality of the product. Unfortunately, when a lot of this stuff has been pushed underground, now you get the variants, what I would say is the new drug dealer is a shaman now, you know, where it's gone away from maybe traditional South American, where someone would recognize they had capabilities and from a young childhood would study and learn the plants. So you listen to the historical aspects of the Shipibo people and their cultural understanding of plants and herbs. And you see these documentaries with the pygmies, for example, and the average, which are living in a prehistoric type existence, but that pygmy guy can recognize 10,000 different types of plants and their nuances and what they're for, where we wouldn't even know anything, and we would not survive 1 week in the environment that they thrive in because of their understanding and integration with nature. So I think, to bring it full circle, you're talking about this devoid or this kind of separation that we've created with the digital world. How do you feel the answer moving forward is on that? Like, how do we take the advantages of the modern world that we have today, integrate it with technology, ancestral health, and evolve as a species in this new world?
Yeah, I think because of our progression with technology and us increasingly moving into the metaverse, and people, you know, as the population grows and there's more and more of these pandemics, this isn't the last, this is not the first and not the last, and people are going to be, it's going to be weird. It's going to be tough with this kind of population. So I think more and more that's where we have to incorporate the ancient ideas. So I think, using words like sapient and evolved healthcare, it's really, let's evolve our current thinking about health by going back and understanding our hunter-gatherer Homo sapien origins. So, and I think it's the most critical to do that now, as the diseases of modern society, be that metabolic disease or infectious disease that will become increasingly more difficult to manage, be that mental health issues that will be potentially worse because of the digitization of our experience. I think that's where going back and looking at our past and integrating that with Western medicine and with modern medicine to then give a better quality of life for people. And what does that take? That takes an acceptance that we do not know everything from modern science, that we have ancient wisdom, humanistic wisdom like these pygmies have, understanding our biological world. And by integrating those together, we can be happier and healthier. It's that simple, and that's what Sapien's about, teaching people about our ancient techniques, and Evolve is about integrating those techniques with modern medicine in a clinical setting.
Dr. Shlifer, you want to share how people can reach you, follow you, find out more about your message and all the, please, shameless self-promotion.
Self-promotion, yeah. I mean, I'm most active on my Instagram, drgaryevolve. EvolveHealthcare.com is my website where you can learn about my practice and where it's always changing. And then sapien.org is our Sapien organization where you can join the tribe, start a program, connect with us. We do meetups, all sorts of things. And if you want to hear me ramble on more about this stuff, I have a podcast called the Sapien Podcast. And it's really like a passion of mine. And I try to bring in like all sorts of different thinkers and doctors and people in my world. And that's a great place to listen and learn more about me. So
you've been a fascinating guest. This has been very informative, and I appreciate and wish you the best in your work moving forward. And I hope we'll get you back to the Biohome for some more fun stuff real soon. Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you so much.
All right, brother.
Appreciate it.
All right.
Yeah.
At Bioptimizers, our mission is to fix digestion. And a cornerstone of digestion is gut flora. P3OM is our patented probiotic formula. In fact, we call it the Navy SEALs of probiotics. You see, strong proteolytic or protein digesting activity is paramount to having a healthy gut flora. And of course, P3OM provides that. The good news is, unlike weaker probiotics, P3OM survives the digestion process. What it does is it basically multiplies the good guys while protecting you against pathogens, or what some people call the bad guys. P3OM really helps to rebuild your digestion. And what that allows you to do is to maximize nutrient uptake, energy, and metabolism. To find out more of how P3OM can help you, go to www.bioptimizers.com.
Thank you for listening to the Bioptimizers Awesome Health Podcast. You can find more information at bioptimizers.com.